What's up, everybody? My name is Peyton, and this is Tethered, a hybrid approach to following Jesus. Now, you might be asking, what does a hybrid approach mean? Well, we recognize that the way people find community, both in a digital and an in-person interactions, is how they're going to find God and build the relationship with God, both digitally and in person. And so Tethered exists in that space so that you can find community and grow in your relationship with God and do it all right here at tethered.online. One way that our hybrid approach finds legs and takes root is in our Tethered Tunes Spotify playlist. It's free to access Spotify. It's free to access that playlist. And every week we customize new songs, new reflections, new devotionals so that you can connect with God throughout your entire week. So be sure you follow the Tethered Tunes this week. You can also find all of our social pages, Facebook, Instagram, just Tethered online, and you'll find all of those and stay connected with us. You know, all of this is about being online. I remember whenever I was first being exposed to online, we had to do www, the World Wide Web. And I love that idea of the World Wide Web, this one space that everyone around the world can connect at. And really, that's at the heart of what Tethered is. We want to connect people. So I wanted to play with that idea in this very first series, in that www. First off, this week, we're going to talk about you are welcome here. You're welcome here. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter your past or where you come from. You are welcome here. Next, you are worthy. We're going to talk about that next week. You are worthy. You are worthy because not of anything you do, not of who you are, what you've accomplished. That's how the world classifies worthy. But you may need to hear this. You are worthy because of whose image you've been made in. And then finally, you are wanted. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. You are wanted, and you are wanted now. You're not wanted later. You're not wanted when your life is all figured out. You are wanted now. So let's dive into this week. You are welcome. You want to know what one of the worst feelings is? It's the feeling of being left out, of being uninvited, of being unwelcome at a party or a place or a job or in a relationship. And maybe you have experienced that feeling of being unwanted. Whenever I was a kid and I wasn't invited to a party, which I wasn't invited to a lot of parties, I didn't know about it. We didn't have social media then, so I went about my weekend oblivious, and I'd go back to school and maybe I'd hear about it, but it's already gone and passed. But that's not the case today. Now kids are all over Instagram and social media. They know when they're uninvited, and it's tearing them apart. In a more casual way, maybe you felt unwelcome or at least out of place if you've ever been underdressed at a party or overdressed, like you show up dressed to the nines, your friends are all casual, and you're just like, okay, I guess we're doing that. Right, out of place. I remember whenever I was in high school, senior year, the mayor's son was in our graduating class. So she invited all of our senior class to her house towards the end of the year. She was, we're going to have lunch, dress up, fancy dinner. We're in her sunroom, glass doors that look out to her garden and her pool. It was really, really a nice thing. One of my classmates, his name was Lex, and he didn't do this kind of thing. In fact, that day he wore one of those t-shirts that has like a printed on bow tie and tuxedo look. He just wasn't his place, but he was a class clown, and so he made a joke out of it. And I remember, never forget, the mayor is giving an address to us, all of us students about to graduate, about our future, and Lex, in the middle of her talking, stands up and yells, "Pool party!" and runs out the class doors and jumps into her pool. He was out of place, not where he wanted to be. He made a joke of it, but it's not always joke-worthy. Have you ever felt unwanted? Have you ever felt unworthy? Have you ever felt undeserving? Have you ever felt unwelcome? At Tethered, we're all about the person of Jesus. We want to be like Jesus, and we want to help you strive as you become like Jesus. So I want you to hear this right now. At the beginning of this, the bottom line, Jesus invites the people others reject. Jesus invites the people others reject. There's a story in one of the Gospels, Luke, in Luke chapter 7. This is a story that happened 2,000 plus years ago. And you might be wondering, what does a story that happened 2,000 years ago have anything to do with my life today? Good question. In the story, we follow this character of Jesus. Now, Jesus walked the earth claiming to be God. Now, if anybody walks the earth claiming to be God and does the kind of things that Jesus did, he's at least worth listening to. Pay attention to. Sit up a little straighter in your seat. What does he have to say? And people weren't as sure what to believe about Jesus, just like you might be. Who he was, what he was about. In fact, there was this group called the Pharisees. We don't use that phrase or terminology anymore. But there's this group called the Pharisees. They were these religious leaders. Think of like priests and pastors and preachers today. And these Pharisees, they were very pious, devout. They were outwardly religious. I mean, they kind of had to be. They had 613 laws they had to obey, and they had to hold other people accountable to. But the problem is because they were so outwardly religious, because they had to be so strict on these laws, they slowly fell into ritualistic obedience. What many of our churches fall into, actually. And it was all about purity. So whenever ancient people, especially in the Bible, whenever they think about sin, they think of it a lot how we think about dirt. So if you have somebody who's dirty and filthy, maybe they have mud all over them, and they go into a clean room, do they become clean walking into that clean room? No, not at all. The room becomes dirty. And that's how they viewed sin back then. If somebody was sinful, was living in sin, they were filthy. So you couldn't get near to them. If you were clean and pure and amazing, they had to be purified, and then they could enter into your presence. Okay, that's the history lesson. Here's the story, though. One day, a Pharisee named Simon, he decided to throw a party. Now, these parties were a lot different than parties are today. Like, they didn't go grill hot dogs. They weren't playing the hottest Jewish rap. No, they had public discussions. And really, the whole point of it was to show off their knowledge. So who was gathering? It was the who's who's Pharisees. They had formal robes and tassels. They had cleansing rituals. And the meal took place in an outer room. Kind of like if you were to have an office in a park. It was a porch encircled in the outer room. So you had your room, and you had the porch circling the outside, and they would purposely leave the door open. Why would they do that? Why would they open up the windows? It's because common people in the town would listen into the Pharisees talking. They would hear what they had to say. So the Pharisees would be talking about the social trends, who's who, what's going on in the world. They'd talk about politics. You know, what was that politician do? Who are we voting for? They talk about theology. They talked about the Mandalorian. Whatever they needed to talk about that day, they were going to talk about it. So why did people listen? It's because they didn't have internet. They didn't have Tethered online. They didn't have TV. They couldn't watch the Real Housewives of Jerusalem. This was first century reality TV, and it was shocking. It blew people away. They gathered around and listened, and that is where we enter into the story in Luke chapter 7. Look what it says. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. There was code language there. You probably didn't recognize it, but that's okay. The text says, a woman in that town who lived a sinful life. Now, you might be thinking, isn't that the whole point of Christianity? Like, everybody's sinful? Why did the author need to point out that this woman was living a sinful life? And it's because the author is using code language. It's kind of like whenever songs blur out, or you're watching a movie on TV and it blurs out a certain language or scene. It's the same thing happening here. What this author is alluding to is that she was a prostitute, if I could be blunt. So imagine this scene real quick. You have the Pharisees, this religious group, puffed out chest, having ontological arguments about pneumatology. I mean, these are the showboat guys out in public so people could absorb their knowledge. And then you have the call girl. And she walks into the party. And you know the Pharisees are raged in protest. Like, she can't be here. She's unclean. She's unworthy. She's impure. She doesn't belong. She's gonna taint us. She wasn't invited. She is not welcome. I want to hit pause right there. I want to zoom in on this woman, this hurting woman. Yeah, sure, absolutely, she made bad choices. But here's what we have to recognize about characters in our Bible. They're just like us. And sometimes they end up places in life that, like, they wake up and they don't realize how they got there. Like, she never set out to be a prostitute. There's no way. There's no way. She was 11 years old at a slumber party with her girlfriends. And they're all going around the circle saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? And one of them pipes up and says, I want to be a teacher. And they're like, lame. No one wants to be a teacher, loser. The other one's like, I want to sell real estate. And they're like, okay, cool. It's commendable. It's great. Good luck. Another one's like, I want to be a stay-at-home mom. And they're like, oh, wow, that's really commendable. Awesome. And then this lady pipes up and says, I want to be a hooker. I want my own pimp. Now, it's ridiculous for us to even think about. So we have to put this into context. Likely, this woman had maybe a father who didn't protect her or abused her. Maybe her parents died. And in this culture, if the parents died, everything went to the oldest sibling, and so she wouldn't have any other way. Maybe her boyfriend pressured her, and she became pregnant. And because she became pregnant, she was rejected by her family. She was rejected by society. She eventually became unemployable. No one wants to be around her. She had no choice. She needs to both take care of herself. She needs to take care of her child. Here's what I can guarantee, though. This woman, her entire adult life, men have used her and men have abused her. Women, they've glared at her hurtfully. No, sorry, you're not welcome. You're not invited here. So this woman, we walk into the scene in this story, and she kneels in a posture of worship. She takes this jar of perfume and she breaks this jar of perfume at Jesus' feet. And then she pours this perfume on his feet. Now, something pretty amazing just happened. You may not realize it. This woman, she just used all of her most valuable possession. Perfume during this time was not cheap. It was not accessible to every person. This was likely a year's salary, some scholars say, that this woman just broke at Jesus' feet. But here's the other thing. It was also her business card. This was her advertisement. You smell nice. Your clientele want to be with you. You make money so you can go buy more perfume, so you can attract more clientele, and then you get lost in this vicious cycle that you can't get out of. But in one moment, look what just happened in one moment. Two things happened. One, this woman shows this extravagant act of worship. She gives everything she has to Jesus. I don't want any more. My most valuable possession, Jesus, you are worthy of that thing. And at the same time, she shows a symbol of repentance. I'm leaving my old way of life. I don't need that anymore. I don't want it anymore. I need something better. I need something new. Jesus, I need what you have, she says. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair and kissed them and poured perfume on them. Here you have this woman crying profusely at Jesus' feet. Have you ever been in a moment where you couldn't stop crying? About a month and a half ago, my wife and I's firstborn son was born. And he didn't cry at delivery. He didn't cry whenever they did all of the checks and procedures. The first time he cried was the next day whenever I had to change his first diaper, which is a terrible experience. If you've ever changed the very first diaper a baby has, the worst experience you'll ever have. So I changed his diaper and he starts crying, and I feel both guilty, but I'm helping you, but I don't know what I'm doing, and you're crying and I feel like I'm causing you pain. And I finally get the diaper changed and I'm a little shaken. I eventually hand him off to his grandma, and I'm just kind of walking around the house, kind of collecting myself. Eventually, I go into where my wife is and I fall on my knees and begin crying uncontrollably. And I'm not a very emotional person, and my wife knows that. So she's both trying to crack a joke, but also like, honey, like, what is wrong? And the only words I could get out between all my blubbering and sobs and snot is, I didn't know I could love him this much. So here you have this woman at the feet of Jesus. She doesn't have a towel to dry his feet. She lets down her hair. So his feet are covered in perfume, and she takes her hair out. She begins to dry them, which is completely inappropriate for her to do. Like, Jewish women didn't unbind their hair. And when the Pharisees who had invited Jesus saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him, what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. It's like Simon assumed that Jesus didn't realize that the woman was a prostitute. Like, he can't be God. He can't be a prophet. And Jesus basically responds like, oh yeah, well, I just read your mind. Like, let me show you. Then Jesus turned towards the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house, Simon. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time that I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little. And then Jesus said to her, honey, your sins are forgiven. So there's a question that always comes to my mind whenever I read this story again. Like, what caused the woman to come and do this? Like, why would she do this? I mean, think about the journey she had to go through to get to Jesus' feet. She had to come out of her house and walk across town past all of the men jeering at her and whistling at her and calling her in. She had to wade her way through this crowd that's gathered around the Pharisees' porch listening in. She had to then cross the threshold into Simon's house, where not only are there eyes behind her whispering and talking about how she shouldn't be there, but now there's eyes in front of her as all of these Pharisees see this sinful woman walking in there. And then she had to recognize Jesus and fall at his feet. And this is something the Pharisees would have considered scandalous. This is disgraceful. This is appalling. So why did she do it? I think it's because she already knew who Jesus was. Like, she heard him speak somewhere. She saw him love. And it's likely in the same day, like, what did he say? What could Jesus have possibly have said that would have drawn a woman to go through such a journey to get to his feet? Well, Luke doesn't tell us, at least not directly. But in the same chapter of Luke chapter 7, if you go just above this story, you're going to find this little scene with John the Baptist's disciples, and they're questioning Jesus. So Matthew, the other gospel we have, Matthew tells a parallel story in Matthew chapter 11. So Matthew tells about a time that Jesus was preaching when John the Baptist's disciples came to question him. So we can assume that Luke just left that little sermon out, but it's the same day that this woman came to Jesus' feet. So what was that message? It went something like this: if you are broken, if you have been rejected by society, by other people, broken down, if you are desperate, like the woman who's listening at the back of the crowd, who's watching Jesus heal people miraculously, who is witnessing an indescribable, unconditional love, Jesus said, you are welcome. You are welcome. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Let me show you something for just a moment as we close out here. Pointing out the woman's sins didn't lead her away from her sin. She's had her entire life of that. Judging her for her lifestyle, it didn't change her lifestyle. You recognize that, right? In fact, you're probably very familiar with that. Like, shaming her didn't set her free. What changed her? What changed this woman? She had been invited. She had been welcomed in for who she was. And Jesus talks about this other places. He said, I didn't come for the righteous. I came for the sinners. I didn't come for the healthy. I came for the sick. Jesus invites the people others reject. Jesus, he invites the people that others reject. And at Tethered, we do the same. Even if you've doubted God, you've questioned God, you've been hurt by God, you are welcome here. And God welcomes you in. If you've tried to walk away from him, if you failed God, you are still welcome. If you've filed for bankruptcy, if you've attempted suicide this past week, if you've cursed God or committed some kind of sexual sin, God wants you to know right now you are still welcome into his family. Tethered, I want to let you know you are still welcomed into God's family. Jesus accepts you. Even if the world rejects you, Jesus accepts you. You are welcome. Come with your doubts. Come with your fears. Come with your addictions. Come with your rejections. Come with your baggage. But here's what you need to know. Do not come alone. I want you to think, who is one person that you could invite to our weekend experience next week? Who is one person that you could share Tethered tunes with? Bring them with you. Invite them in. Let them know. It doesn't matter the baggage they have. It doesn't matter the doubts they've had. It doesn't matter the lifestyle they live, that God still loves them. God's still pursuing them. God still wants to know them. He seeks them. And they have a place here at Tethered. We're building a community of people, both online and in person. We are tethered. We're tethered together, and we're all tethered to God. You are welcome here. Do you believe that? Do you believe that?